Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to be getting the Comical Grasshopper up and running and have a quick blast around a car park. By the end of the last video we had the body painted and decaled up. There's just a couple of bits we need to do before it can go on the chassis. First, the stripes at the front partly cover the holes for the body posts, so we need to use a sharp knife to clear them, quite a minor thing. Next, we need to fit the reinforcing piece along the back of the body. It attaches with some thin double-sided tape that's included in the kit. We need to cut it into sections, so there's a strip in the middle and a couple of squares at the ends, so it's going to be firmly attached. Now we can peel the backing off and drop it over the rear body posts before popping the body on. As we lower the body, it's going to pick up the reinforcing piece so it's in the perfect spot with the holes lined up. Give it a bit of a squeeze to make sure it's well stuck, and that's that bit done. The light pods can go back on using their screws with the washers and O-rings. Just like before when we did the test fit, we only want to do them up far enough that they're secure, but not so tight that we flatten the O-rings. The idea being the O-rings give the pods a little bit of give in a crash. Well, so far I think it's looking quite good. Now, something I noticed on the driver's parts tree is he has a steering wheel. Now there's nothing to mount it to as such, but I figure we might as well try and use it. I think if we jam it up into his gloves and add a spot of glue, it's going to stay put. We just need to add a little bit of paint. We've got some gloss black for the rim, silver spokes, and just for fun a Mercedes sticker on the boss. I think it came from a Hercules hobby truck. It just so happens that it's the perfect size. To attach it, we offer it up to the driver and jam it in. Then add a couple of spots of cyanoacrylate and give it a stroke with a cocktail stick to get it to flow around. It'll only need a single drop per side. That's going to take a little while to dry, and we don't want the vapours to fog up the inside of the windows, so while the body's off, let's install the ESC and radio. Now usually with Tamiya ESCs they're all set up ready to go with a stock brushed setup. It's still a good idea to check though, so you're sure it's going to work as it should. For the test setup, all we need to do is connect up the ESC to the receiver channel 2 and the steering servo to channel 1. Now we don't strictly need the servo at this stage, but it's handy to tell if the radio is working or not. We won't connect the motor just yet until we know the ESC's in brushed mode. When we turn the ESC on, we should see a green LED flash if it's in brush mode. So with the battery connected, we can flip the switch and see what happens. And there we go, a green flash, so it is in the right mode. Now we can connect the motor. Now being brushed, it only uses 2 wires, so we need to check in the manual to see which of the 3 we need to use. It's as simple as the ESC blue to the motor negative, on Tamiya motors that's usually the green wire, and ESC yellow to the motor positive, the yellow wire. The connections just push together. If the connectors are fairly good, they should click when they're all the way in, but these old style bullet connectors aren't great at the best of times, so it's not always easy to tell. Then, this time when we turn on the ESC, we want to see a single flash on the LED and a single beep from the motor. That tells us it has reverse and low voltage protection enabled, the safest setup to get started with. And there we go. With a NiCad or NiMi you can get away with disabling the low voltage protection, but with the stock setup you might as well just leave it on. The run times are going to be more than long enough without risking over discharging the pack. From the test fit in the last video we know roughly where the ESC needs to go, so all that's left is to clean everything with some alcohol and get the servo tape out. And here we are, sometime later. The ESC is attached to the chassis with the radio crammed in between it and the driver. I've used some zip ties to keep the wires out of the way, paying extra attention to the motor wires so they can't get tangled up in the rear wheel. Now there's really no right or wrong way to do it these days, just make sure it looks neat and tidy. Next item, the antenna tube, or in this case the flagpoles. First we need to cut the tube in half. Now if you've got a tape measure or a long ruler handy, you're good to go. Otherwise you can use some string or wire to find a middle. If we match the overall length and mark it, all we need to do is fold the wire or string in half and we've got our midpoint. To cut the antenna tube, all we need to do is score it by rolling it under a blade. Then it's going to snap at the score. It's very easy stuff to work with. Next, it's back to the decal sheet where we find the two flags. As with the other decals, we need to cut them out. Now, there's a few methods of fitting the flags, but here's what I do. First, I peel the backing off. Remember to be extremely careful about letting the decals stick to anything you don't want them stuck to. Then loop it around and stick the ends of the flag to themselves. Place the antenna tube in the loop and pull and roll it so it's nice and tight in the middle. Then smooth down the rest of the decal. You should be left with a nice smooth flag, but like so many things it needs a little bit of practice, so don't worry too much if your first try is a little bit rough. Besides, it's a flag, it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. When you've got both flag poles complete, they can fit to the chassis. On one side you can use the pole as an actual antenna tube. It'll keep the antenna out of the way, plus it'll get the active portion up above everything else, which will help a little bit with the range. The tube then presses down into the mount that we fitted earlier. Same goes on the other side, except no antenna. As a note, after driving it around a bit, I did find the tubes can be pulled out fairly easily. I lost one on some grass on the buggy's first test run outside. I've since replaced it and used a couple of turns of very thin plumber's tape at the ends to bolt them up a little bit so they're a bit tighter. So far it seems to be working nicely. Now there's not much left to do, we just need to pop the body back on the chassis and fit some body clips. Then with the transmitter on we can plug the battery in and tuck the leads out of the way. Turn on the ESC and we can set up the endpoints on the steering. Now if you've got a super basic ESC you can't really do this, but even most entry-level radios these days have a knob to change how far the steering servo moves when you turn the steering wheel. The idea is you want to adjust it so the steering wheel can turn end to end without the steering servo getting bound up. Turn the endpoint way down, hold the steering wheel to one end, then gradually turn the endpoint back up until the steering stops. Then turn it back down just a little bit and you're all set. I did find with this setup 100% endpoints were close enough, which is really quite rare. Usually there's a bit of fiddling to do to get things set up just right. Right, one more thing before the quick test run. We're going to stick an on-off sticker by the switch. You don't really need it, but if you're going to let other people use the buggy, it's far easier for a non-RC person to find the switch if it's clearly marked. We'll stick it to the plastic just above the switch. And that then is one complete Comical Grasshopper. I think we'll end up with some ESCs and maybe some simple electronics to turn them on and off, but other than that it's ready to go. Now we've only got a quick test run in a car park, but it does show off the buggy quite well. First, despite its tall and thin appearance, it's extremely stable. I was expecting it to roll quite easily, but you can really throw it into a corner, and despite a fair bit of lean, it does stay on its wheels. The tyres aren't the best on slightly damp surfaces. Even with the fairly low power from the stock setup, there's a lot of wheel spin. But for a beginner setup, that's not at all a bad thing, as it keeps you out of trouble if you're a bit heavy on the throttle. When there's some grip, wheelies are super easy. In the warmer weather on short grass, it's perfectly at home. You can learn some throttle control to keep the wheels down so you can still steer. It's a great way to learn that going flat out isn't always the fastest way to get around, but without the crazy speed of a higher end basher. I think for a beginner, especially a young driver, this is a great kit. Even as a not so beginner, it's still a lot of fun. A slightly warmer motor would complete it as a setup, or better yet, if you can find some friends to build one too, they'd make a brilliant stock racing league. They don't need much space to have an awful lot of fun. Add some cones and a couple of small ramps and you're going to be entertained for many, many hours. Right, that's about it from the Comical Grasshopper for the time being. There might be some upgrades and more exciting bash videos when the weather picks up again, but for now, that's it. Next week, I think we're going to be back on the Tamiya Wrecker build, or maybe we'll start on the Sand Scorcher. Decisions. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching. Like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!